শোনা যাচ্ছে? দরজাটা বন্ধ করে দেবো? এবার কি তাহলে শুরু করতে পারবো? So, good afternoon, dear students. I'm Himadri Lahiri. I teach English in Netaji Subhas Open University, and today I will talk about something which is in your syllabus, and this is part of a book called Imaginary Homelands, written by Salman Rushdie. So, you see, I will talk about this for about 40 minutes, and if you have questions, you can ask me questions also, and you see, then we can have some kind of discussion for 5 or 10 minutes, not more than that perhaps. You see that Salman Rushdie was a very well-known diasporic writer from India. He had multiple diasporic points actually. You know that he left India, then went to Pakistan. His father actually went there after partition, and then he moved to England, and there he stayed for a long time. And when he wrote this book, he was there at that time, and after that he moved to the US again. So if you look at the trajectory of his movements, you will find that he is a kind of restless soul moving from one country to another, having multiple diasporic points, and he belonged to a new category of writers who have been writing from about 1960s, a group of writers, 1960s, 1970s, who originally hailed from India but are now scattered in different parts of the world. And this group of writers is usually called diasporic writers, Indian diasporic writers. who have many homelands in a sense. So when you think of the title Imaginary Homelands, you will have to give some thought to the title itself, because you know that it's very interesting that he calls the homeland imaginary. Why is it so? Reflect on this point for some time, and you will find that he wants to distinguish between the real geographic material world on the one hand and the world that is imagined on the other. This is one point which is very important, because this kind of idea, this kind of concept can probably only be generated from a writer who has multiple belongings. From that point of view, you see this is a unique writing, and this kind of theories, this kind of concepts were later developed by other writers as well. And the second part of the title, Homelands, is also interesting because this is posited against another kind of a land, because a kind of a distance is created when you say homeland. What actually happens that the location of your articulation seems to be a different place, a place other than the homeland itself. So you find that there is a kind of geographical difference and geographical distance. You have in your mind two kinds of lands. One is the host land, other one is the homeland. So you are speaking from the host land to the homeland, or you are speaking about the homeland itself. But the point to note is also that you know that homeland is in plural. If you look at the title, don't make any mistake there. The title is Imaginary Homelands, and therefore it's in the plural. And why is it plural? One point maybe, which perhaps he has not discussed in the essay that I am going to talk about, Imaginary Homeland. Homelands itself is an essay in the book. It's the title essay. One reason that has not been mentioned there is that he may have in his unconscious mind not one homeland but more than one homeland. So for a writer who moves from one land to another, who has multiple points of belongings, multiple homelands in fact, therefore a diasporic person, a diasporic writer can think in terms of multiple homelands. That may be one possibility, but this possibility Salman Rushdie has not discussed in detail. Another thing that he speaks of in the essay is that in fact even in one person the image of the homeland may be not in singular but in plural. So at one point of your life you have one kind of idea of the homeland, and at a different point of your life when you have grown up, your idea of the homeland may be a totally different one. So from that point of view, even for a person, homeland may be not one but many, and hence it's called homelands. Salman Rushdie also has spoken of multiple homelands from multiple perspectives. My homeland may be the same, although it may be out of my own homeland, but my idea of homeland may not be the same as yours. So you see that this particular idea of the homeland in the plural is also very interesting, and it actually opposes the singular kind of mindset of human beings. We are in fact habituated in conceiving of our homelands in the singular. But as I maintained, for a diasporic person, it's totally a different kind of homeland altogether. Now, let me get into the essay itself, which to my mind is a very, very important essay. And my students, I would obviously want you to think of, go through the essay very, very carefully, because there are meanings between the lines, and there might be some meanings which you may miss. Therefore, go between the lines and we'll find a wealth of meanings in the text itself. And this is almost a canonical text in the diasporic studies. This is one of, it was written in 1981, the book was published in 1981, and therefore you see it is almost 20 years have passed in the meantime. So this is a long period, and it is one of the earliest books on the concept of the homeland itself. He begins the essay very, very interestingly, and if you have the book with yourself, you can point out certain areas I would like to actually indicate. My edition of the Imaginary Homelands, Essays and Criticism 1981 to 1991 is Granta Books, London. This is the particular edition that I've been using, but you may have different editions altogether, but that doesn't matter. I will more or less go from one point to another as Rushdie uses his ideas, employs his ideas in the essay itself. The first interesting point that he makes is that he altogether talks in terms of immigration. And when I use the term immigration, my dear students, you must think of another term, which is immigration. What's the basic difference between immigration and emigration? We are not always very certain about these differences, but please check the dictionary, see the word in the dictionary, and you will find that the two words uses two perspectives. When you use the term immigration, you see from the perspective of the country you are living, okay, your homeland. And when you use the term immigration, the gaze is from the country where you have arrived. So in the essay, mainly Rushdie uses the term immigration in terms of movement from the homelands to the hostland. So the first, and he has used the term immigration in a larger sense. In fact, he uses two kinds of ideas. One is time, and another is the geographical concept of land, territorial concept. When he uses the term immigration in one respect, which is the temporal respect, so he uses on the whole spatio-temporal, both the aspects, spatial and temporal aspects. And when he uses the term immigration from the past, which is a very interesting kind of articulation, because he sees time as not static. And when you look back to your past, for example, you are nostalgic and you look back to your childhood days, you think that you have emigrated from the past, you have emigrated from your childhood to a newer temporal point. So he says very, very deliberately in the very first paragraph that all of us actually have emigrated from the past. Past is a very interesting country from that point of view, and the past becomes a foreign country. So because of the emigration from the time which has passed, you are an immigrant, and the time which is left behind has become a foreign country altogether. So he introduces here the concept of the foreignness, okay, which he would later apply to the territorial concept. So for him, foreignness is both spatial and temporal. And you see that he goes back to his own country because when he looks back to his past, and he lived in Bombay, he in fact is visiting a foreign country in two senses. Number one, it is a past country, and therefore it is a country of the past, and therefore it is a foreign country. And secondly, it is a foreign country because now he is a citizen of Britain, Great Britain, England. Okay, so from England he is looking back to this past and finds it a different kind of a country altogether, a foreign country, a country that is not exactly as familiar as the present location, and therefore to be familiar with the old location, he must visit there. So he visits his old country. Okay, and this country, the particular place that he visits is Bombay, where he spent some time there. Actually, his father spent there for a long period before he migrated to Pakistan. But there was a picture in his home, in his house in England, and that particular picture actually transported him to India, to Bombay, which is Mumbai right at the point of time, this particular time. So he goes on a visit to the land, and he remembers certain things and cannot remember other things. But interestingly, he sees the things that he remembers as wonderful things, because these things are actually these act as symbols which suck him into the past, symbols which take him to the past and gives him a kind of guided tour of the past, the time when he had a different kind of experiences altogether. So that is one aspect of his visit to Mumbai, and then he speaks of reclaiming the land, but the land cannot be reclaimed in the same way as you think you might. The people who has been displaced from the particular time, and the person who is displaced from that particular territorial location cannot reclaim Bombay in the usual sense of the term. Okay, because the river has already flowed, and with the river, with the waters, you have also flowed to a different location, and therefore the way you look at the place is not the same, the perspective is different, and therefore claiming the place as you used to do in the past cannot be done right at the moment. So past therefore becomes a foreign country, and Bombay too as a territorial location becomes a different country altogether. Now he raises a different question altogether, because he thinks he initiates the discussion about how the memory works. Okay, as I have already mentioned, the memory works in fragments. Okay, whenever he can remember one thing and forgets the others, there is a process of selection. You select one thing, Bombay talkies come to your mind, but the other things may not come to your mind at the same time. So there is your mind goes through a process of selection. You select certain objects, and certain objects gets deleted. So the things that get deleted actually is not problematic according to Rushdie, because he thinks that it is like a broken mirror, and the objects that you remember are in fact shards of memory. Okay, shards of glasses, which are shards of memory, and these act as a kind of a symbol. For example, you think of the talkies, okay, and what idea, what concept, or what ideas flood back to your mind? You ask yourself. Actually, Rushdie remembers, for example, you go through the text and you'll find that he has given a list of things that he remembers, even a thing like he crosses the railway bridge at a particular station in Mumbai, something like that. But you see, most interestingly for us who are students of English literature, he refers to a Hindi film, Mr. 420, where he particularly speaks of a song, and you may be familiar with the song. Particularly the persons who belong to my generation may be much more familiar with the song, but I think you too are familiar with the song. And he mentions this song in the footnote, and I am reading the song. It's in Hindi. मेरा जूता है जापानी, ये पतलून इंग्लिस्तानी, सर पे लाल टोपी रूसी, फिर भी दिल भाई हिंदुस्तानी. Which means, the translation goes like this: oh, my shoes are Japanese, these trousers English, if you please, on my head red Russian hat, my heart is Indian for all that. So in a sense, he also defines the concept of India here. Okay, so what was India like at that time? And you also may try to contrast this concept of India with the concept of India that you find now, which goes viral on the Facebook and elsewhere, and the old concept that Rushdie actually speaks of is the concept of a multicultural India. Not only a multicultural India, he also thinks in terms of globalization. Although globalization has not taken place institutionally at that time, but it anticipates globalization because it speaks of the amalgamation of different cultures. Cultures that have come from Russia, cultures that comes from Japan. So India is the site which has absorbed different cultures accumulated from all over the world. In another essay on Commonwealth literature, which I will discuss the next day, you will find the recurrence of this idea, the idea of a secular India, the idea of a multicultural India, multilinguistic India, where different cultures converge. This too has been reflected in the essay, and most wonderfully in this Hindi song. And this Hindi song reflects the very spirit of India of the time. So you see that this is one sherd of the broken mirror, and he feels that simply because the mirror is broken, because you are not there at the location, the Indian location right at the moment, and hence you may think that the glass is not complete, the glass is not full. Okay, it is not a complete, comprehensive kind of a glass. On the contrary, it is a glass which is broken. There are shards of the glass, but then he picks up the shards of the glasses at one point, one by one, and then he wants to join this through a glue called imagination. Okay, so imagination acts as a glue to conjure up the concept of the nation that existed at that time, a concept that he visits from the temporal moment of the contemporary time. Okay, so he imagines, he really imagines Bombay of the time, and ultimately Bombay is not the exact Bombay that has in the meantime emerged. So he thinks of the Bombay of the past, okay, and therefore the country Bombay is metonymically used here. Bombay in fact is India, it represents India, and therefore the India becomes an imagined country, imagined homelands by extension. Now he speaks a lot about the shards. He thinks of the shards as different symbols which provides you access to the homelands. So therefore it acts as symbol. These particular shards acts as symbols. I will also point out that you can think of these particular symbols metonymically, because you know, when you think of a body, for example, when you say a book per head, okay, a cake per head, I will give cakes, one cake per head. So what happens is that the head is just one part of the body, and the other parts of the body are deleted. So, but then, although deleted in mind, the body remains, other parts of the body remains. So you move the body, the head actually represents the other parts of the body as well. So you move from the head to other parts of the body. So these shards of the glass are actually both symbols, and also metonymically you can see that you move from one symbol to another, and in the process you also try to imagine the parts that you have forgotten. Okay, therefore you see that amnesia, which might overwhelm you, parts of the amnesia might be dispersed, and you may be anamnesic. Anamnesic is a word which means that the amnesia is forgetfulness, and anamnesia is recalling of the objects that you have forgotten. So you becomes, through this metonymical process, you also think of the parts that have been deleted, and therefore you can also remember parts of it. So from that point of view, you imagine through these symbols and through these metonyms, you imagine a land that is displaced right at the moment, but that is there, the picture of the land is still there, the homeland is still there in your mind, and you reclaim that in your own way. So the way you reclaim this particular land may not be the same way that your friend might reclaim. But reclamation is in fact a very important point, and Rushdie will come to that point later in his essay, and he says that this reclamation is very much there for expatriate writers, for immigrant writers, for diasporic writers, the writers who are in the exile. All of them, despite themselves, they are in the process of remembering. Okay, so this remembering is a fight against amnesia. So and when you remember, you in some way or other you claim your homelands in your own way, although there may be different other questions that may come in between. But this remembering is one way of reclaiming, and all diasporic writers usually try to remember and reclaim. And if you notice that, you will find that writers in the diaspora, they usually write about their own homelands, okay, from a different time and from a different place. So these writings are in a way fighting against amnesia. Now this question of reclaiming is a very important theoretical question as well, and it is also a debated question, because in the homelands it is often said that the people who write from the diaspora, they do not have much rights to speak on behalf of the people of the land, people of the homelands. There are many opinions like that. Okay, although those of us who actually live in our own country, India for example, we do not hesitate to claim Jhumpa Lahiri or Bharati Mukherjee or a scientist who might be there who has won a Nobel Prize, Vijit Banerjee. So we reclaim all of them as Indians. So we are in a process of contradiction, we make self-contradictory comments. We are in a dilemma, whom to claim and whom not to claim, okay, and when to claim and when not to claim. So this is a very interesting kind of a process. But then you see, from the diasporic writers' points of view also, most of the writers claim India, although many of them claim India as the land of their ancestors, especially second, third generation people. They claim India or China or any other country for that matter, Africa, as the lands of their ancestors. But then, for example, the first generation writer like Bharati Mukherjee overtly refused to consider herself as an Indian. This is also a process of a very complicated process through which the writers go. But then most writers, I'm sure, they try to reclaim, and most of their writings are about their own homelands. But these homelands are not only imagined, but they are also imaginary. You know that Anderson have spoken of the nation as an imagined kind of nation. The nation, you may not have any idea about Chennai, but you claim Chennai to be part of your own nation. Okay, it's a kind of imagine. You imagine the entire land and its people as your own. In the process, the land is also claimed and imagined. And therefore, the land, the homelands are both imagined and they are imaginary. When I say imaginary, or Rushdie say imaginary, you see that often the writers, what he means is that the writers think in terms of a frozen India, for example, an India that is frozen in time. So the India that has changed may not come into the purview of a writer who is writing now, a writer who has left the country some 20 years back. The country India the country of 20 years ago remains firmly etched in his or her mind. So from that point of view, India remains an imagined homeland. So he goes through this kind of logic, and then he comes to the question of India as he saw it, as he in fact wanted to believe it, the India which is multicultural, and the kind of politics that you will find there. I will like to read out from one particular 3 or 4 lines from which you can have a clear idea about what he means by imagined homelands. Please listen carefully and you will find what he actually means. But if we look back, he says, we must also do so in the knowledge which gives rise to profound uncertainties. So the process involves uncertainties. That our physical alienation from India almost inevitably means that we will not be capable of reclaiming precisely the thing that was lost. That we will, in short, create fictions, not actual cities or villages, but invisible ones, imaginary homelands, India's of the mind. So, Indias of the mind, this is what he means by imaginary homelands. And as I said, this is an India frozen in time. Okay, so spatiality and temporality are intricately interwoven into the concept of the imaginary homelands. Now, what is very interesting is that he privileges the shards, by which he means fragmentary visions, okay, instead of a comprehensive vision. So there is a conflict between a comprehensive vision in which you see your homelands in totality, not leaving anything out, and an India that you can remember in shards, in fragments. These are the two processes through which you can remember your homelands. And he privileges the second one, the fragmentary one. He mentions John Fowles and says that John Fowles in Daniel Martin used a sentence which is like this: whole sight or all the rest is desolation. And therefore John Fowles actually privileges the view that is complete, a view that is comprehensive. He opposes that, and he says that there may be multiple views, and these multiple views are in fragments, not in totality. So, dear students, please remember this point very, very carefully, because this constitutes one important part, this idea constitutes one important part, one important argument of his essay. I will go to the next point, which is about India. Okay, so this point keep in mind. Then he moves on to the next point, which is basically about India, and he in this sense that he confesses that this world of India, or any homelands for that reason, that we build up is in fact a very shaky edifice. He uses the term, in fact, that it is a edifice that is very, very actually very, very weak. Okay, weak in the sense it's composed of fragmentary. So when he uses the term edifice, he employs the image of a building that you have constructed. So the process of imagining the homelands is basically a process of construction. This process is fragmentary and not whole or comprehensive, as John Fowles would have us to believe. Okay. Then you see that he thinks of the India, and when he thinks of India, he thinks of India as a country of many languages, many religions, many peoples, many cultures, and he also says that a writer like him can participate in religious evocations of Hinduism, for example, and similarly a Hindu can participate in the evocations of Islam. And in this way, India has built itself up as a kind of homelands which is unique, which is a democratic country, a secular country, a unique country, and this India he wants to perpetuate in this particular essay. But please remember that this essay was written in 1981, almost 20 almost 40 years ago. When he talks about India, he talks about certain points. For example, he brings in politics. And he says that politicians and literary artists are natural enemies. Why does he say this? He says this because, interestingly, you see that politicians who believe in power, they want to make people believe in the image that they want to evoke, that they want to build up, that they want to have us believe in. So they want to create a kind of a land, the kind of a homelands that might be different from yours. So he says that from this point of view, it is very, very urgent that the diasporic writers, like all writers, like the writers who live in the homelands, India for example, they have very important responsibilities, because the responsibility is to contest, combat the images that are wanted, that are actually sought to be fostered by the politicians and other interested people. So it is easier for the diasporic writers to write from distance, temporal and spatial, and to talk about the country, homelands, they want to believe in. And they want to contest the politicians' versions of the homelands. Okay? So from that point of view, the literary artists actually perform a wonderful job, very important job in keeping the country integrated, in keeping the image of the country wholesome, healthy, secular. So from that point of view, you see that the diasporic authors are uniquely placed because they have a very wonderful, unique kind of perspectives. I'm reading from a few lines from him, from Rushdie. If literature is in part the business of finding new angles at which to enter reality, then once again our distance, our long geographical perspective may provide us with such angles. So this angle, which means perspectives, is important. The way we might see India, we might see our homelands, may be different from the way or ways from which diasporic writers like Rushdie or Jhumpa Lahiri might see. We may not see eye to eye, but then there might be different perspectives, and these perspectives are very, very important. So you see that these writers who see from a different perspectives, they have double vision, he says. Double visions in the sense that they have the imagination of the old imagination, the memory of the past, and also the memory of the present. They have the memory of the country, and they write from a location which offers them a different kind of a view. Okay, and therefore they write from that kind of a perspective as well. So he calls this double view. But you see that you can extend this double view into multiple views also, because the writers also travel. Okay, they travel from one country to another and even settle. The diasporic writers who have multiple diasporic points, they can see from different perspectives, multiple perspectives. So these multiple perspectives become very important in the representation. And you know that if you read essays and books by Stuart Hall, for example, who has written a wonderful book called Representations. Okay, and it has a title also. I can't exactly remember the subtitle also. The subtitle, which has signifying practices as very important phrase in the subtitle. this particular book, Representations, makes it abundantly clear that acts of representations are also political acts. And Rushdie also says the same thing, that when you write about your homelands, you are writing politically. So this is a politics of contestation. This is a politics of creating another angle. This is a politics of creating another perspectives. So this politics is a very important point of view, and this is also important simply because you know that diasporic writers, as he reminds us, are all translated people. And when he says we are translated people, he has in mind the Latin etymological roots, which means the carried over, okay, carried across. So you are no longer in the same place. You have been transported from one point of time and place to another point of time and place, and in the process you have got translated. So these views, the views of the translated people in this respect, are very, very important people. He says that the translated people, the lives of the translated people are not very simple, because they have to encounter different kinds of questions in the diasporic space. Since I think that the time is not enough, I don't have enough time at my disposal, I will be short here. You see that one problem is that the diasporic people actually faces the problem of definition. They are often asked, who are you? Okay, are you Indian? Are you Englishman? Are you diasporic people? They are neither insiders, not outsiders. So they are caught in between the insiderness and the outsiderness. Sometimes they are called Indians. We Indians reclaim them as Indians, sometimes when they get awards, particularly so. British people, they may not consider them to be insiders, although they are citizens of the country. Legally, they are not outsiders, but in people's views, they are outsiders. So they face a lot of questions about their identity, and therefore they are, in a sense, not one self but many selves. Okay, so they see the world from the perspectives of many selves, and therefore it is a unique kind of a perspective which should be taken into consideration. And Rushdie says that he was admitted to the society rather easily, simply because of several points, several factors. He had better complexion, fair complexion, number one. Number two, his class was upper middle class or aristocratic class. Okay. Number three, he could speak English. So the variations of different kinds of English, the English that I am speaking is not obviously British English, that is Indian English. As soon as I open my mouth, you locate me as an Indian. Okay, so you see the pronunciation, the intonation, these are all important things. So this also places me into a particular box. You call me Indian, you call me Bengali, you call me a person from North India or South India. So you see, you are defined by your English as well. And Rushdie says, since he could pronounce English, he was taken more easily into the English society, or for that matter into the American society. So these are different factors for which his entry into the British society or English society was easier, but that doesn't hold true of all diasporic writers. But mostly they come across questions of racism, questions of identity, And these are very, very important questions, and you will find the one common question that the diasporic writers actually mention often is that they have faced this question everywhere: where are you from? Where have you come from? If you say that I am from New York, you will not be believed. Your word will be taken with a pinch of salt. So you see that language and the way you pronounce your language, you utter your English, or any language for that matter, is really, really puts your identity to the foreground. So from that point of view, he says that it is important that your identity is established, and you have a unique place, and from that place you can write about your imaginary homelands. But he says that we should be all careful about the ghetto. Okay? Often the uneducated Indians, uneducated Chinese, uneducated people from all countries, they live in ghettos, which means they live exclusively into one particular localities where you are a slave to your own language, the language you knew from your own country. And you do not dare to go outside your ghetto, and you do not interact with the people of the new land, the diasporic space. Therefore, you create your ghetto. And he says, Rushdie, that ghetto is a very important point from which you should come across. There is a point which Bharati Mukherjee also very, very competently elaborated in a different essays. Rushdie says it is very important to transcend ghetto mentality. Don't think of yourself as wholly Indian, because you need to acculturate. I don't say assimilate. Assimilate is a different word, which means that you are fully merged into a different culture, and therefore you create a sense of center and periphery binary. I don't use the word assimilation from that point of view. I don't use that for that reason. I say acculturate. You need to acculturate. So what is very important is that you need to acculturate and therefore come out of the ghetto mentality. This ghetto mentality is very important because in a diasporic space, you are not only an Indian, but you also you are a British citizen. You are a citizen of the world. You are a person who must attain international perspectives. You may be rootless in a sense, but you may have your roots in different places. So from that point of view, he emphasizes that transcending, leaving behind the ghetto mentality is a very, very important kind of perspective, kind of thing. So international writings from international points of view is very important. You should do that, and therefore the internationalization of your writings is very important. And therefore he says, he raises a question: for whom are you writing? He says that I am writing not for any particular group. Okay, I am writing for everybody. Okay, maybe some writings might be appreciated much more in the in your imaginary homelands, but that is not the sole concern. It may be appreciated elsewhere also. So he talks of an international reception at the same time. And from that point of view, he considers himself and all diasporic writers more international, and emphasizes the point that internationalization is the inevitable fate of all diasporic writers. And he ends this particular essay, Imagine Homelands, beautifully. He refers to a particular book and then continues his argument and ultimately ends with a very important metaphor that please open your door a little more. keep it a little open, keep it ajar, so that he means the wind of the outside, the news of the outside, the perspectives of the greater world, the international perspectives, and interactive perspectives, dialogic perspectives, that all can enter into your house. And if that is done, your house no longer remains a ghetto. You become more and more international in perspectives. That is how this essay ends. And I also want to draw curtain here, and I will wait for any question that you may have, any important point that you may have. We can interact. Please ask me questions or any comment if you like. Any question? How does Salman Rushdie express his dilemma as an expatriate writer getting moved away from his own homelands? How does dilemma? So you will find that this is how. Just a minute, please. Yes, sir. On behalf of the College of the Department teachers, now, thank you, Tarun Taposh. But let me just try to answer this question. I have more or less discussed the questions of nationhood, these questions of citizenship, the questions of language, the questions of how Indians see him. So you see that all these are part and parcels of the dilemma that Rushdie himself actually found himself involved in as an expatriate writer. But please remember that, please keep in mind that I would like to differentiate between the expatriate writer and the immigrant writer or the diasporic writer. Bharati Mukherjee has made the distinction very, very carefully in his foreword to a collection of short stories called Darkness and Other Stories, where she mentions that expatriate writers come for a limited period of time and they do not get involved in the affairs of the country. Okay, one does not get assimilated is not the right word, acculturated into the world. So she was assimilationist. Bharati Mukherjee was assimilationist, a kind of point of view that most diasporic writers do not use or employ. But you see that expatriate writers is somebody who stays for just a few days or few months or few years, then comes back home. But immigrant or diasporic writer settles down. So from that point of view, I would obviously consider Salman Rushdie as a diasporic writer or immigrant writer, and of course with citizens of the countries that he has migrated to. So more or less I have pointed out the different dilemmas that he has pointed out. Language, you can see it from the points of view of language. You can see it from the point of view of citizenship. Even if you are a citizen of England, you may not be considered to be so. So there are many, many kinds of dilemmas. Any other questions? So can I stop here? Thank you very much then. Thank you very much.